Yeah, I think this is a mature sangha that already has a lot of faith in the teachings and in the practice, but I think we can always deepen our faith in the teachings and in the practice. And sometimes people earlier in their practice have the thought that my life is so busy right now, I don't have time to practice. I think that's not uncommon for people to say that. I can't come to Zazen today because I've just got so much going on. Or I want to practice, but I've just got all these difficulties at work, so I can't. And I think a real shift occurs for us in our practice when we don't have that split and instead see absolutely everything that we're doing as both an opportunity to practice, but just is practice. And we see the teachings manifesting in all of our activities. We don't forget to think about how the teachings are mapping onto our experience. We just do. We just map it onto our experience and go, oh, here's evidence of the teachings yet again. You know, whether it's impermanence or how having a strong identification with the self causes suffering. Any one of the teachings, we just start to see in every single thing that we're doing the truth of the teachings. I was thinking about how it was maybe 12 years ago, I had a pretty big trauma in my life. And even though I had already been practicing for a fair while, more than a decade, maybe a decade and a half, my reaction to this huge stress was actually not to do Zazen. I just felt like I don't have the bandwidth for Zazen. I can't do Zazen. And I also noticed, it's kind of amusing, that I got this thought that koans are just annoying. They're just annoying and they're irrelevant. I had this sort of slightly angry feeling about koans. Like, when your life is as stressed as mine, koans just seem stupid. That was my thought. And a little part of me could see, oh, you're just in a very difficult state right now. And because you're in that really difficult state, you just can't slow down enough to appreciate the koan study and to appreciate the teachings. So a little part of me was kind of had enough faith that I could see that my stress was distorting my relationship to my practice. And after maybe 6 months or so, I somehow found my way back into daily Zazen. And yeah, so that was about 12 years ago that happened. And then recently I had another very big stress. And I noticed that my reaction was very different this time. I didn't in any way feel like I was too busy or too stressed to practice. I actually completely felt like this is where practice happens. This is exactly where the rubber hits the road. This is exactly the place to practice in this big stress. I didn't waver. I didn't have any doubt about it at all. It's just been really interesting to compare those two different experiences, and how over the years our practice does really deepen and we are more capable of coping with extreme difficulty, and our practice does support us and make it possible to work with really extreme stresses. And it's not that those stresses aren't still painful, but we can not have an aversion to the fact of the matter. We don't feel aversion to the fact of the matter. When I look back at that stress from 12 years ago, what was happening to me was stressful, just objectively by any kind of measure. I think everyone would have more or less said, oh my gosh, that sounds extremely hard. But still, the majority of the stress that I was experiencing was self-generated by my resistance to the fact of it all. I so much didn't want it to be the way it was and felt it shouldn't be the way it was. And it was all of that additional thinking and resisting to reality, my resistance to reality, that caused me so much more stress. So this time round, that resistance to things is not so great at all. I remember, I think it was Suzuki Roshi said something kind of amusing, that it's good to do Zazen for maybe an hour a day. But if you're particularly busy, you should do Zazen for 2 hours a day. And I think we could add, not that I'm saying we should do Zazen for 2 hours a day, because I don't do that, but it would be good if we could. But the flavor of that is, if we are particularly stressed or if we are particularly busy, this is the perfect time to actually really turn towards our practice. Like turn towards it like a flower turns towards the sun. Turn towards our practice when we're most stressed or when we're most busy. Because so much of practice isn't actually, I mean, sitting on the cushion is a big part of our practice, but a lot of our practice is just the contemplative mind. Just what is our mind doing throughout the day? Is it engaged in resisting reality, or is it engaged in seeing reality through the lens of the teachings? Yeah. I read Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Miracle of Mindfulness, which I hadn't read for a long time. I read that again recently. And in the beginning, there's a lovely story where Thich Nhat Hanh talks about a friend who has two young children, and a job and a partner, and how his life was kind of full with all of those responsibilities. But when he had the thought that the time helping my son do his homework is actually my time, it's not my son's time, it's not time where I'm having to carve it out to be with my son, and then I'll get back to having my own time to myself. When he had the shift where he could see everything that he's doing is his own time, it's a really valuable if we can make that shift, that whatever we're doing, it's actually our time. It's not somebody else's time. We're not waiting to get our time back later. I think I felt that a lot in my life, that I've got to do this thing and then I get to rest. I've often had that thought, do this thing and then I get my time to myself where I can rest. Be all active and involved with people, and then I get to have my cup of tea and be by myself. That kind of thought. Which is nothing wrong with that. We can do that too. But we can also see whatever it is we're doing as our time. And if we see it all as our time, then we've just got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We just have endless amounts of time for practice. There's just no shortage of time. Because even in our dreams, and probably all of you had this experience, that the Dharma comes up in our dreams. So we can practice 24 hours a day. I want to read a poem. It's not really a poem, it's a verse. It's from Dogen's fascicle Uji, The Time Being. This is a translation by Kaz Tanahashi, Moon in a Dewdrop. The fascicle begins with this is how it begins. An ancient Buddha said. So I'm going to read it out and then go back line by line, because it's got a lot of references that probably many of us wouldn't really know, but I had to look them up. But I'll read it out. For the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. For the time being, proceed along the bottom of the deepest ocean. For the time being, 3 heads and 8 arms. For the time being, 8 or 16-foot body. For the time being, a staff or whisk. For the time being, a pillar or lantern. For the time being, the sons of Zhang and Li. For the time being, the earth and sky. So I'll just go through it. For the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. My thought about verses like this is there are different ways to understand what the metaphor might be pointing to. And I think we should trust a little bit that whichever way we see it that really captures our imagination and deepens our practice is the best. So I have not studied this fascicle with any of my teachers, so I'm only speaking from my own experience of how I understand it. So for the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. When I think of the highest peak, two thoughts come to mind. It's extremely vast and open, like on the top of Everest. Just wide, 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 all inclusive, wide, wide, wide. Endless sky above. So that sense of all encompassing and wide. Then another thought I have too about the highest peak is from the highest peak, the air is very clear and you can see everything crystal clear and bright. And sometimes brightness is a metaphor for the relative world, for the world of things, all the things we experience with our senses. So from the top of a mountain, we can see everything. We can see the beauty of everything, and maybe the fragility of everything, and the difficulty of everything. So for the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. For the time being, proceed along the bottom of the deepest ocean. And the two thoughts that come up for me in terms of proceed along the bottom of the deepest ocean. In a more conventional sense, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of darkness, and it's hard at the bottom of the ocean. So we can be with that. We can be with the pressure and with the darkness and the lack of a way to see. We could be with that. But also the bottom of the darkest ocean. Dark is sometimes also used for the ultimate, where we make no distinctions between anything. We don't see things as separate. We see things completely unified. Like in the middle of the night when it's a completely dark night and there's no moon, we can't distinguish one thing from another. For the time being, 3 heads and 8 arms. This 3 heads and 8 arms is a way of talking about the wrathful deities, the wrathful deities. So with difficulty, there's lots of difficulty right now all around the world. Maybe there's always lots of difficulty all around the world, but sometimes it feels a little more punctuated, and right now it does seem to feel a little more punctuated for people, that there's these wrathful deities, difficulties, great difficulties. So we can be with that. For the time being is to wholeheartedly and completely be with. Well, not even be with, but be. Be with is a little bit like a slight split there. To fully be with, fully be, completely aware and engaged with whatever is happening. On the highest peak in the deepest ocean, with wrathful deities, or with the 8 or 16-foot body. So the Buddha, it was said, was that when he was sitting in Zazen, he was 8 feet tall, and when he stood up, he was 16 feet tall. Which is just a lovely way of saying what a grand person, what an amazing person he was, and we are. So whether we're with terrible, difficult situations or fully awakened beings, we can be with them. For the time being, staff or whisk. The staff represents someone who's mature in their practice, and the whisk represents an awakened being. So we can be with all of our wider sangha. And for the time being, a pillar or lantern. I think of a pillar and a lantern as kind of special but ordinary at the same time. The pillar holds up the Zendo, it holds up the ceiling of the Zendo space. So it's very important. But it's also just a pillar, and a lantern illuminates the space, which is a wonderful thing, but it's also just a lantern. So we can be with the ordinariness of the pillar and the lantern. And then it says, for the time being, the sons of Zhang and Li, and they're like common names in China, common names. So whatever the common names might be in whichever culture we're in. For the time being, earth and sky. So I like this verse. This is where I think my practice is happening right now, is to really not resist each single moment of my day and see it as a great opportunity and see it that it just is. I mean, it's an opportunity, but it just is. And to be grateful for it. Remember another thing that Thich Nhat Hanh said somewhere about when we have a toothache, we really look forward to the toothache going away, and we feel like we'll be really happy when the toothache goes away. And we usually are, but it doesn't take very long for us to forget about the toothache and to get back to having other worries about things. And one thing I've been doing recently is when something's feeling difficult, I remind myself, and I don't mean this to sound flippant at all, but it could be a lot worse than it is, and to actually be grateful for the difficulty that I have right now. Because I don't have a toothache. I might have something else, but I don't have a toothache on top of it. I often think about that about my car. My car is not broken down. I turned the ignition and it worked, and the tires are not flat. You know, no matter what difficulties we've got, it's kind of nice to appreciate what's going well when we don't have a toothache. And if we do have a toothache, then we can be grateful that we don't have something else happening. And that can help us really feel gratitude even for our difficult times. Yeah. And just to let you know that at 10 past the hour, 10 past 8 your time, I actually need to go unexpectedly for an appointment that I need to attend to. So I'll just say a few more things because I'd like a few minutes to chat, and then maybe Mike or Phil or Carol could lead a bit more conversation if that feels good. So another thing I came across recently about Soen Roshi was that even though he was a well-known teacher and had his own sangha, he still would go do sesshin with other teachers. And there's one story that he conveys of how after he had been, well, first he describes how he would sometimes meet this woman on a train, I think it was a train, who would talk to him at length, and he would politely listen, but a little part of him kind of was looking forward to her stopping talking. And then after he did this retreat, he had a deepening of his practice, a Kensho experience where when she came to talk to him the next time, he didn't have to perform being patient. He didn't have to kind of convince himself to be patient. He actually felt this deep joy just to see her and deep joy to listen to her. And I loved when I heard this story that there's no end to our practice. We can keep finding more and more ways in which we can feel this joy about life, whatever it is. You know, I was going to say throwing up at us, but that sounds a bit terrible. But whatever is arising in our life, we can have less and less resistance to it, and there's no end to that practice of having less and less resistance. And from that, I think really does come more joy and more energy and more gratitude. Yeah. So I think I'll stop there, because it'd be good to have some conversation. And somehow or other, my screen, I want to see everybody. Halfway through it, it stopped me seeing everybody. I don't know if that's my doing or somebody else's doing.
Are you on gallery view or speaker view?
Oh, there we go. It's come back now. I was on gallery view, but it disappeared. Yeah, that's better.
Hi, Nettie. This is hi, Mexico. To see you. All these new faces. I don't think I've zoomed in with you all before. I wanted to thank you for your talk, and it reminded me of something that Catherine Thanos, who was my first teacher in Santa Cruz back in the 80s, said to me. And she said, "This practice is impossible. I vowed to do it." And it cracked me up, because what else is there, right? As you said, you just do it. And we do it all the time, not just when we're sitting. If we remind ourselves, and I try to remind myself that whether I'm watching my dogs or I'm taking care of someone else's house or whatever I'm doing, it's all part of practice. So I vowed to do it back in the 80s, but I have to keep reminding myself of that vow. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai.
Hey, Nettie.
Hey, hi, Jay.
I was very moved by the idea of your statement of turn to the fact of life, right? And even this morning when I was on my morning walk, I was thinking, I'm about this idea of resistance to life, as if you can resist it, right? You know what I mean? So either you're unconscious or you turn to it. And, some of those really hard things, you can't get away from it. So you are really stuck with it. And so at some point you might get the benefit of having to face that and understanding that the ability to open my heart to my facts of life has to do with all the facts, the good, the bad, the whatever, in terms of that. So, and there's something akin to this, is something you said a couple of weeks ago about not getting too high and not getting too low. And that even gets deeper, where it just is, right? So I can hold it and I can still have feelings, but I don't have to grasp it or blow up or anything. And it just gives you more capability for life, for this fact of life, right? And for what we are, right? And when we're sourcing what we are, this fact of what we are, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it does really take a lot of time of practice. I mean, I was just reflecting on it. It seems to have taken years for the meditation to be settled enough to really give the benefit of that. When I sit down and I'm going to have to face whatever hard is delicious, right? Like what you were saying, it's no better time, right? And when I feel that resistance, I mean, I was just talking about one of the people I meditate with on Sunday. It's like, we both said, when we feel that resistance, it's time to go. Like, let's do it, right? That's the call to practice. The idea of practicing all the time, I mean, it starts to get into accepting my life, right? Just as it is, with consciousness, not with an expectation where I'm going to get peach ice cream at 3 o'clock every day, like I like, right? And be sad if I don't. So, yeah. So yeah, the fact of life. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can you guys hear those frogs in the background here?
Yeah.
You can hear them? Yeah.
I heard them earlier, yes.
Yeah.
Thought, oh, I thought it was crickets, but it's frogs, huh?
Well, actually, before Phil had his during Zazen, Phil was unmuted, and I was muted, but I could still hear the frogs because they're not on Zoom. So I could hear the crickets and the frogs at the same time, which was interesting to hear the two at the same time.
Call and response, huh? Well, something you said, or something Jay just said, I don't know. My mind is a sieve and it doesn't hold on to things very long, but reminded me of something I heard today about the phrase the person said was, we are an emanation of that vow. And that struck really deep in me as to what we are. And talking about practice, and each moment being our own living of the vow. The practice is the vow for me. The vow is the practice. Those two words are, I think, interchangeable to me. So,
Yeah.
So now the world is aflame with war. And I'm trying to remember the vow to come to the aid and care for all beings. And not knowing how to do that, but at least remembering that the vow is there, that that's who we are, an emanation of the vow. And the vow is much vaster than anything I can conceive of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when our difficulties arise, or the difficulties arise around us, we're not. Resistance is futile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like resistance is futile, but that doesn't stop us still responding appropriately to conditions. So don't resist the fact of it all, the fact of it. But still in that non-resistance, we actually are freed up and have more energy to then respond appropriately. So not resisting doesn't mean passivity at all.
No.
Passivity at all. It just means being able to wholeheartedly see things as they are. Because when we have resistance, as soon as we have resistance, there's a distortion because part of us doesn't want to see something, so we're distorting it, and then we can't respond so appropriately because we're distorting our experience. Yeah, fully seeing it as it is. Here it is, and what do I do next? Then we work out what to do, which sometimes there isn't anything special to do. And when there's nothing special to do, I just try to remind myself, just see if I can not do harm. Just see if I can not do harm. That's not bad. It's pretty good to just not do harm.
Sometimes that's got to be enough. You know? I may not have the solution to the world's troubles, but I can not do harm. That's a good reminder. Thank you.
Yeah.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
All right. You said, what did you just say that made the question come up? Never mind. I'm well, when oh gosh, you know, when I get really start distorting things with my own resistance and reactions and wanting them to be different, and I catch myself and say, oh, there you go, you're telling this story, and yeah, but that story I'm really, you know, oh, I got the story down, and it's so hard to stop that. And do you have any Guidance, what do you do to stop that?
Well, I think one thing I do endeavor to do is notice that when if I am feeling like restless or agitated in some way, if I notice that's happening, I say to myself, even though my thought seems to be right to me, because I'm restless or agitated in some ways, there's a little off in my thinking. So that's kind of like a method, a heuristic I use with myself. And then if I have the capacity in that moment, then I can slow down a bit and reflect. So what is it that I am thinking right now? And how may that be actually, not skillful, dualistic in some way, not in accord with the teachings, And usually if I just settle down a little bit, I can see the error. And for me, often it comes about when I want to point out to someone how I think they're not seeing something. And when I have that thought, it's a little agitating for me to have that thought. And then when I can settle down and say, actually, I don't actually need to do anything right now, or maybe I could just try and be more helpful rather than pointing out how someone could do it differently, or whatever it might be. But just, yes, if my mind is agitated in some way, not at ease, which is fine, sometimes that happens, but I do see if I can find some mental space to see there's some little thing that's off in my thinking. Because if I hold people like that I really respect, who seem to be able to stay pretty steady in most conditions, I kind of hold them in my mind and think like, how might they be making sense of this right now? Yeah, so that's what I do. And I do find that to be effective. I do, definitely do. Yeah.
Well, and as you untangle that and you have that experience, it actually calls you to more practice, really, because it's opening, It's that shift that you were talking about earlier, right, with practice, where it's not, oh my God, I got to hit the resistance. It's like, I can find a moment of grace, or I'm not even that. That's too much. I just can find a moment and slow down.
Yeah. So I probably need to head off in a minute. So I just want to thank you for us all being here together. This is how the Dharma moves around, and how we share wisdom with each other and deepen our practices, just by turning up and being together. So I better head out, and I'll leave it with you. Well, I can't see everybody again. I want to be able to see everybody and just say goodbye.
Well, it's wonderful to share time and space with you. Thank you for coming.
All right. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right, I've got this one. So we have a few more minutes here. Does anybody feel like they would like to open a bit of a conversation, share a little bit about how Nettie's talk impacted them into the space, or we'd like to just let this be the fullness for tonight? We stop here. Happy with either one.
Not wanting to cut anyone off. Uh-oh. There's echoes. Not wanting to cut anyone off, I will admit to being exhausted, and just taking in what was said is enough for me. I'd like to chant our way out of here.
I'm with you, Carol, although I'm totally open to hearing anybody who's moved to speak.
Yeah, of course.
Are there any notes for the sick list or deceased list?
Okay, it's all right.
Do we have Wendy on the sick list? Wendy, can't think of her last name right now.
No, I don't think so. Do that.
And Jay, you can share now if you're ready or willing.
Please. What? Mute. Okay.
Well, if we're ready for sutras, does somebody have the power to put them up?
I have them ready to go if I get the power to share.
I believe I gave it to you, Jay, but my computer crashed right at the same time, so. You have the right to share?
I do not.
All right. Give me
I can just say Nettie's presentation was it's encouraging to me. I've found myself more and more willing to practice even when I'm busy, to in fact more when things are worse, to practice more. And it's just very encouraging. And I find the whole group here very encouraging to me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Bill.
Bill. Jay, you should be able to share now. Bill, it's great to be with you. Thank you for that comment.
Jay, unshare just for a second. I can't get to the control I need. Oh, come on. Okay. All right, that's it.